We've all been there, right? The neighbor with the dog that barks all night, the aspiring teenage drummer, or, the barbecue that just seems to smoke out your entire garden. Most of the time, we just grumble and learn to live with it. But what happens when that little annoyance crosses a line and becomes a real legal problem? Okay, let's dive into the fascinating area of law that's designed to keep the peace: nuisance law.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to cover the basics: what actually counts as a nuisance, who has the legal right to complain, and how courts figure out if something is unreasonable. Then we'll look at the common defenses a neighbor might use, and finally, what can actually be done to put a stop to it.
So first up, when does that friction you have with a neighbor turn into something you can actually take legal action over? Well, this is where nuisance law comes in. You can think of it as the tool the courts use to balance your right to enjoy your property with your neighbor's right to use theirs.
Let's be real, it's a question many of us have asked ourselves at one time or another. The law of nuisance is all about dealing with the seemingly endless ways people who live close together can get on each other's nerves.
And wow, the list of potential issues is long. We're talking about things like constant cooking fumes, nonstop noise and vibrations from construction, or those tree roots that are slowly cracking your patio. It could be water runoff from their property flooding your yard, or dust from a nearby factory. These are the classic problems that nuisance law was literally built to solve.
Now, here's a really crucial point: the difference between nuisance and trespass. Trespass is direct, right? Someone physically walks across your lawn. Nuisance, on the other hand, is indirect. It's the smoke, the noise, or the smell that drifts from their property over to yours and messes with your enjoyment of your space.
Okay, so let's say you're being driven completely mad by your neighbor's weekly 3-day-long techno parties. But can you actually sue them? Well, the very first legal hurdle you have to clear is proving you even have the right to bring a case in the first place.
And the key phrase here is something called proprietary interest. It sounds fancy, but all it means is you have to have a legal stake in the property that's being affected. So you need to be the owner or a tenant with an actual formal lease. Just living there isn't enough.
The famous case of Hunter v. Canary Wharf is the perfect example of this. A bunch of residents sued because the massive new Canary Wharf tower was blocking their TV reception. The court made a really important decision. Only the property owners or the legal tenants could sue. Their spouses, their kids, or any lodgers living there, since they didn't have a legal interest in the property, they were out of luck.
Let's move on to what is really the absolute heart of nuisance law. The one word you're going to hear again and again is unreasonable. See, nuisance isn't about stopping someone from doing something illegal. It's usually about stopping them from doing something totally legal, but in a way that is unreasonable and affects you. The courts have been trying to solve this puzzle for centuries, and this quote from a case way back in 1862 sums up the whole philosophy perfectly. Give and take, live and let live. It's a constant balancing act between your right to some peace and quiet and your neighbor's right to, practice the trombone. But how does a court actually decide what's reasonable? Well, they weigh several factors. They'll look at the character of the neighborhood, they'll look at how long and how often the nuisance is happening, they'll check if there's any malicious intent behind it, and they'll even consider if the person complaining is maybe being a little overly sensitive.
Okay, let's talk about locality, because context is everything here. The noise from a factory that would obviously be a nuisance in a quiet, sleepy suburb might be totally acceptable in the middle of a busy industrial park. The character of the area really sets the standard.
But, and this is a huge but, there's an exception. The case of St. Helens Smelting Company created a critical rule. If the nuisance causes actual physical damage, we're talking acid rain from a factory killing the trees on your property, then it doesn't matter where you are. Physical damage trumps the locality argument every time.
Another really interesting factor the courts look at is motive. An otherwise perfectly legal activity can become a nuisance if your reason for doing it is just pure spite. The law really doesn't like it when people use their property just to annoy their neighbors. This is one of my favorite cases, seriously. So a music teacher was giving lessons at home. Her neighbor, a Mr. Davy, got so annoyed by the sounds that he started banging pots and pans and whistling as loudly as he could every time a pupil showed up. The court said, look, he was free to make noise on his own property, but because his intent was malicious, it became an unlawful nuisance.
Right, so we've seen how a claim gets built up, but what can the person being accused say in response? Let's take a look at the most common legal defenses.
And here's the one that surprises almost everybody.
Arguing, hey, I was here first, or what the law calls coming to the nuisance, is actually not a valid defense in court. You can't just set up a super noisy factory and then claim anyone who moves in nearby has no right to complain. It just doesn't work that way.
The case of Miller v. Jackson is the classic example here. A couple bought a new house right next to a cricket pitch that had been there for 70 years. And, surprise, cricket balls kept landing in their garden. The court confirmed that the club couldn't just say we were here first. But, and this is the interesting part, because the club was a valuable community asset, the court didn't shut them down. Instead, they just ordered the club to pay the homeowners damages for the trouble.
Now, there are a couple of other defenses that can work. One is called prescription, which basically means if you've been doing something for over 20 years without anyone complaining about it, you might have earned the right to keep doing it. The other is statutory authority. If an act of parliament specifically allows the activity, well, that can be a complete defense.
All right, so let's say you've made your case. The court agrees with you, it's an unreasonable nuisance. Now what? What can the court actually do about it? Let's look at the remedies. There are three main options on the table. The most powerful one is an injunction. That's a court order telling the neighbor to stop the activity or at least limit it. Second, you have damages, which is just financial compensation for the harm you suffered. And finally, there's abatement. This is a limited self-help right, like you being able to legally trim tree branches that are hanging over your property line.
So let's just do a super quick recap of the absolute must-know cases. Hunter versus Canary Wharf tells us who can sue. St. Helens Smelting says physical damage is a total game changer. Miller v. Jackson shows that we were here first just won't fly. And Christie v. Davey proves that being malicious can turn a perfectly lawful act into an unlawful nuisance.
You know, at the end of the day, nuisance law is just a constant negotiation. It's a legal reflection of the social contract we all sign up for when we live beside other people. It forces us to ask that tricky question: how do we balance our own individual freedoms with our responsibilities to the people around us? It's definitely something to think about next time you hear that late-night drumming start up.